discovering through this series is that our soul is really made up of three parts. Three parts to our soul, and so you might remember what they are. The first one is our will, right? It's the inside of us. It's our wants, our desires, our intentions. And then the second part is our mind, our thoughts, our values. And then lastly, our body, our actions, our behaviors. Our will, our mind, our body, when integrated together, make up our soul. And your soul is not just something that lives on after you die. Your soul is living right now, and it is the most important part about you. And here's where I want to go today. Here's the question I want to ask. What do you do when your world falls apart? What happens when your world falls apart, and is your soul ready for that? Right? Because for all of us, either we're kind of heading into something hard, we're in something hard, or we're coming out of something hard. Hard is part of life. And so are we ready for the difficult things that will happen? And it reminded me of many, many years ago, my wife and I decided that we were going to run a mini marathon. How many of you, any other marathon runners out there? Because I can say I'm a marathon runner now. Anybody? Well, a mini marathon is half of a full marathon. 13.1 miles. Now, I got to tell you that up until this point, my wife and I had done zero training, zero training. And I thought to myself, it's 13 miles. How hard can it be? Very hard as it turns out, very hard as it turns out. The most I had run up until this point was like to the mailbox and back. And so I'm sitting there on the starting line. We've got our bib, and I'm doing my stretches because other people are. I'm like, I should probably stretch. Okay, let's do this thing. And I start running, and my wife starts running, and it is about mile 4, and I realize I am in big trouble. I mean big trouble to the point where I am, walking in mile 5. I'm crawling in mile 6. I'm just doing my best to keep up. And so I'd walk, and I'd run a little bit and walk and run a little bit. And by the time we got to the end of that race, I'm in the final mile of the race, and they kind of have this wagon that comes by and is like, for all the slow pokes, and they're like, eventually this race has to end. And so if you can't finish it, we'll finish it for you, and we'll just drive you to the finish line. And I refused to be one of those people. And I got to tell you, the chafing was incredible. I mean, like nothing I ever experienced. My nipples were bleeding. It was terrible. And I'm in the last mile of the race, as God is my witness, a paramedic stops the ambulance, gets out, comes over to me and says, "Sir, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" He said, "Because you look like crap. You look like you're going to die." I said, I'm fine. And, as I'm limping to the finish line, and he did not take my word for it because he followed me the entire last mile of the race, thinking that somehow my blood would be on his hands. I do not know. We crossed the finish line. We got home. We absolutely collapsed into our family room. I mean, I've never experienced anything like it in my life. And so we're sitting there, and we can't move. We can't even hardly talk. And after about just 45 minutes of just sitting there, my wife says, "I'm going to go up and take a shower." And I said, okay. And so we had a long staircase, and she is barely, with the railing, just barely making it up the stairs as I sit there to just continue to think about my life choices and think about how messed up this choice was. And a few minutes later, I hear this blood-curdling scream from upstairs. The kind of scream you would imagine if someone was being murdered, right? And so instantly I'm like, I got to get up there. But I can't move. I literally could not move. And so I'm like, I'm coming. And as God is my witness, I'm on all fours crawling up the stairs saying, I'm coming. And I finally make it to the bathroom, collapse onto the floor. And here she had been screaming because a couple of her toenails fell off during the race. And when the water hit her toes, apparently you scream like you're being murdered. I don't know. And I got to tell you, we were so unprepared for that race. And it got me to thinking about so many of us that are unprepared for the difficulties that life's about to bring us. Our souls are nowhere where they need to be ready for that kind of thing, right? The same is, just like I had to be ready for that marathon, same is true of your soul. And sometimes everything in your life can be going great, but if your mind is not working properly, and your will is out of control, or your body and your actions aren't synced up to your values, it will all affect you, right? It will impact your entire person. And so we got to get this thing right. And so it's important to know your very first feeling that your soul is what's running your life at any given moment. It's the life center. Your soul is what's running your life at any given moment, and it's why we have to get this right. And the truth is that we spend a lot of our time and energy focusing on our outer selves, don't we? Right? That's where we spend all of our time and attention, because the world of reputation and appearance, right? How much I have, what others think of me, right? We do that because that's where we receive the applause, and that's where we receive the kind words, and that's where we receive the awards, and so that tends to be the only place that we focus. And our inner self tends to be ignored. We ignore our inner self because those are the places that nobody sees, and nobody rewards it, and nobody recognizes it. And so we don't pay any attention to it, to our own detriment. Because if you ignore your inner self too long, come on, we've all seen this happen or experienced this. When you ignore your inner self too long, doesn't go away or disappear like we hope. Nope. It becomes weak and fragile and causes destruction. So we must pay attention to it because no one else will. No one else is paying attention to the condition of your soul. In fact, this is an honest statement that I want us to begin with this morning, the next fill-in, that I am solely responsible for the condition of my soul. You are solely responsible for the condition of your soul. As we said last week, nobody can grow your faith. In the same way, no one else can take care of your soul. It is up to you. Your spouse cannot take care of the condition of your soul. Your kids cannot do that. A pastor cannot do that. You are responsible for the condition of your soul. And if you've ever gone boating and not had an anchor, you know it doesn't take long to drift into the weeds. Have you ever done that? Right? You've been in a boat and all of a sudden you kill the engine and it doesn't take long for that wind to pick up and you look up and suddenly you are headed right into the weeds. And then you're trying to fire it up and backpedal and you're trying to reverse and get out of that. Boy, it would be so helpful if you had an anchor that would just keep your boat in place no matter how windy it was, no matter the waves that are pushing against the boat. That anchor would keep you in place. And that's what we're talking about today. How can we develop an anchor for our soul that no matter what we go through in life, we will not be moved? We won't be moved. So the question I have for you is, does your soul have an anchor? Does your soul have an anchor? Because as a pastor, I get a front row seat to many people whose lives did not have an anchor and ended up in destruction, ended up in a shipwreck, and now we are trying to piece it back together. And people say, I wish I could reverse, I wish we could get out of the shipwreck. And it was all because we didn't have an anchor for our soul. And we all know this. It doesn't take much living to realize that life can be hard. In fact, there's people in our church that are going through so many hard things. And sometimes it's not choices of your own. Sometimes it's not bad choices, it's just life. Right? It doesn't take much life living to realize that regretful decisions can bring destruction into our lives, or how marriage can be more difficult than you ever imagined, or hurts can be hard to overcome. And soon what you realize is that you are not enough to keep your soul anchored. You're not enough. And I'm not enough because you've tried. We've tried. And the author of Hebrews is reflecting on these difficult things that we go through in life and the toll they take on us. And he is encouraging us to do two things: to find our security and our identity in Jesus. That this will be the thing that will be immovable in your life, that will anchor you when all of life breaks loose. And so here is what he writes about the significance of Jesus' death, his resurrection, and the promise of new life by saying this in Hebrews 6:19. We have this hope. We have this hope in Jesus as an anchor for our soul, firm and secure. He says, if you didn't realize that this is the hope, that we've been waiting for. This is the hope that will actually anchor your soul, that will be firm and secure no matter what comes your way. Right? The writer is saying no matter the ups and the downs of life, this is the one anchor you need for your soul. And it's a hope that will bring your soul to be firm and secure no matter what comes our way. But if we're honest, maybe you're here this morning, many of us would say, I feel like I've been spending a lot of time on my outer world. And if I'm honest, the inside of me feels unsecure. It does not feel like I am anchored. And this morning, I want to give you a couple ways that you could recognize that. If you'd say, man, something feels like I'm not anchored, but I don't even know how to define it, I want to help define it for you. I'm going to give you a couple ways that you would know that you are unanchored. And the first one on your notes is this, that your soul is unanchored if it feels vulnerable to people and circumstances. Your soul is unanchored if it feels vulnerable to people or circumstances. And maybe right away, your antenna's going up, right? Because you feel vulnerable to people, what they think about you, what they say about you. And the Old Testament tells us about the prophet Elijah, who was terrified because Jezebel wanted to kill him. So he did what we probably would do. He ran and hid. He ran and hid thinking, I can't face that. I'm terrified, I'm afraid. And it's in this hiding, an amazing story about God meeting him there. And God fills him with his presence and gives him food for his body and rest for his soul. And he allows Elijah to hear his voice. And his soul is renewed in that moment to the point where he's ready to return back to battle. He's ready to face what he doesn't want to face. And there's many of us who in the same way, we live our lives afraid of what others think of us, afraid of what other people say about us, afraid of what's around the corner. And so it paralyzes us from making decisions because we don't want anybody to think negatively of us. We don't want to lose somebody's approval or acceptance of us. And yet, here's the amazing thing. When your soul is anchored in Jesus, it does not matter what others say about you. It does not matter what others think about you. And you begin to make your decisions in life based on the values of your life versus what people think. And that's a big deal. When you're anchored, you know who you are in Jesus. You're living as one whose soul is secure. And regardless of what happens in my outer world, of what people think or say about me, I know who I am. I'm secure in Jesus. And so if that's you, it might be time to anchor the soul. The next thing, your soul is unanchored if it finds its identity in externals. Your soul is unanchored if you find your identity, like who you are in what you do or what you have. Right? It means that when I'm not secure in Jesus, I will try to control my life, but by controlling the externals. Right? Do I look beautiful enough? Am I thin enough? Have I accomplished enough? Have I made enough? Are my kids doing enough? Do we own enough? These are the externals that we try to manage ourselves because in them we find value. We actually find our identity in them. And instead of dependence on God, instead of our anchor in God, I allowed pride to take its place. Look what I've done. Look how much I've made. Look what I've accomplished. Look how much we have. And the problem is that when you substitute your security in God for external things, it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. And you realize how little you actually control. But when you stake your life on it, and your pride is behind it, it's so easy to lose sight of what is most important, the relationship with God that will actually keep you grounded, regardless of how the business is doing, regardless of the awards and regardless of the accomplishments. You're secure. Because if I trade God as my anchor for what I do, but when what you do is done, you have nothing left. Nothing left to anchor your life. You lose your identity. Hebrews 8, 13 through 15. The writer describes living externally in the flesh, in those things. And this is what they write. For if you live according to the flesh, if you live only for the externals, all the things your flesh craves and desires, right? If you only live according to the flesh, you will die. That's not very encouraging. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. For those who are led by the Spirit of God, for those who have their anchor in God, they are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. Right? So the flesh is our externals. And the writer of Hebrews says, if you just live for your flesh and the externals, you're going to die. It's not going to end well for you. Right? It's putting your confidence in yourself. It only leads to death. Because nobody's identity can be their stuff or their accomplishments, because that soon will fade away. If you chase that as your anchor, you will die on the inside. But here's the good news. Your next fill-in, your identity as a child of God is the only identity that lasts and is secure. When your identity is, I'm a son of God, I'm a daughter of God, the God in heaven who knows you better than you know yourself and loves you just as you are. He's already accepted you. He has a plan and a purpose for your life if you will follow it. Imagine that. A Father in heaven who loves you and knows you. It says, come on, I want to be the anchor of your life. I want your identity to be in me as a son or daughter of God. And if you will do that, it doesn't matter what happens with the externals. It doesn't matter what happens at work. It doesn't matter what happens with the awards and the accolades and how much you have or how much you don't have. Because at the end of the day, you're my kid. And I love you and I've got you. Whew. There's freedom in that. And then lastly, your soul is unanchored if it is easily thrown by life. Your soul is unanchored if it's easily thrown by life. It reminds me of my bachelor party. Hang on, we'll get there. It reminds me of my bachelor party. Night before I was getting married, my older brother was in charge of it, and we went to this place that had a mechanical bull. How many of you have ever ridden the bull? Anybody ever done that before? Yeah, and it looks easy enough, you know, and you get up on that thing, and they made me go first, of course, because, you know, here I am, the party's for me. And so I get on this bull, and I begin, and it begins to rock back and forth. And pretty soon I'm like, hey, I got this. All right, look at me. Might have even thrown in a little yeehaw or something like that, you know, like I'm really feeling it. I'm like, this is easier than I thought. Until I realized that they had it on level 1. And this sucker goes to like level 10. And so I think the person running it was just messing with me, like keeping it on 1 for a while so I'd feel good about myself. And like that thing got to 2, and I was like, oh boy, all right, this is something. And by the time it got to 3, I was thrown so far off of that bull. I had no shot at conquering the bull. And I happened to land on the one piece of a bar where there was not padding. And I walked down the aisle with a massive bruise on my back, you know, just limping my way down. What are you going to do? Ah, man, that bull threw me like no tomorrow. And in part because I had no anchor, right? I was just riding the bull, and the bull was in control. And for many of us, you're just riding life. And guess what? Life is in control. And when life decides to throw you, your world falls apart. Because there's no anchor for your soul. And sometimes life is like the level 1, isn't it? It's like Mayberry in the 60s. Everything's great. And we just falsely assume that we just think life's always going to be that way. It's always going to be a 1. It's always going to be wonderful. Things are going to just go my way. And how many know you've lived long enough to know that that is stupid thinking, right? It's just a matter of time before life gets complicated because life happens. And for you, maybe it's an addiction that hibernated for a while, but it seemed like it's woken up. Or maybe when my career path isn't going like I hoped. Or when my faith is pierced with doubts and I'm wrestling with stuff, I have questions for stuff I never had questions for before. When a close friend betrays me. When I experience significant loss in my life. When I get news from a doctor that came out of left field. And my health is now uncertain. When I'm fearful for the outcome of this or that, or when a relationship falls apart. See, oftentimes we don't think about anchoring our soul until it's too late. We don't think about anchoring our soul until we've already been thrown by life. And yet your next fill in the condition of my soul during difficult times will ultimately determine who I become. The condition of my soul during difficult times will determine who I become. And if your life lacks an anchor, you will get thrown around real quick. But if your life is anchored, in Jesus, your life will stay on course no matter what comes your way. And that's why David wrote this in Psalm 27:1. When he said, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble?" Psalm 119, 114, he writes, "You, God, are my refuge and my shield. Your word is my source of hope." Saying, God, my anchor's in you. You're the one who is my refuge. You're the one who's my hope. It's not anything else in my life, God, it's only you. And it would be easy to read these kind of verses and forget that these statements weren't made by people who had safe, comfortable lives. Right? They weren't out like wondering how they can get the best beauty rest mattress at Mattress World, right? That didn't consume their thoughts. I mean, these are people that are living in caves, running for their lives, and they're in battle. Right? They're facing danger every single day. And David writes, God, you alone are my refuge, and you alone are my fortress, and you alone are my hope. When all the rest of my world falls apart, God, you're the one thing that will anchor me. You're it. And even though they faced so much, none of it destroyed their soul. Why? Because their security was not found in their circumstances. Their security wasn't found in their relationships. Their security wasn't found in money. Their security wasn't found in a job. Their security was not found in their kids. Their security was found in their heavenly Father. And Jesus explained this to his followers, how circumstances don't need to overwhelm them. He taught this in Matthew 10:28. He said, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body, for they cannot touch your soul. In other words, it really ultimately doesn't matter what happens to you because your soul's secure. Nobody can touch that. They don't have that much power. Your soul is founded and secure in me. And so it doesn't matter what they try to do to your body. It's your soul that I want you to focus on. And you and I are solely responsible for the condition of our soul. And so will we be unanchored with our souls adrift, easily thrown by life or caught up in just the externals? Or will we choose to anchor our soul in Jesus? Because sooner or later, and nobody likes to hear this, but it's the truth. Sooner or later, there will be parts of your life that will fall apart. And only the condition of your soul will keep you grounded and help you stay the course. And it reminds me of the story of Horatio Spafford. Maybe you've heard this name before. Horatio was a prominent American lawyer who invested most of what he had in real estate. He lived in Chicago in the late 1800s and lost everything in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. That's right, it was October 8th, 1871, that a fire swept across Chicago, and because of the high winds, they could do nothing to put it out. And when it was all said and done, 300 people lost their lives, and more than 100,000 people were homeless, and it absolutely destroyed the business district of Chicago. It destroyed his home. It destroyed his business. They had no insurance. He lost most of everything he had. And it was time to rebuild. And so in the late 1800s, that's what they did. They began to rebuild their life, and after 2 years, his business started to recover. And he thought to himself, we have been through so much. Him, his wife, his 4 daughters. And he decided that it was time to do a family trip. And so in 1873, he put his wife, Anna, and their 4 daughters on a ship headed to England as he stayed behind to finish up some business. And a few days after that ship departed, he received a telegram from his wife. And all it said was, "Saved alone. What shall I do?" Saved alone. What shall I do? And of course, he panicked to find out what is going on, only to discover that there had been a shipwreck. And all 4 of their daughters drowned in that water. And his wife was the only one who made it. And so Horatio quickly boarded another ship to England. And as he passed over the same waters where his daughters drowned, he penned these words to this famous hymn. When peace, like a river, attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. And as I think about him writing these words after he lost his 4 kids, I can't even imagine that. He's got to be a much better man than me, because I can't even imagine that would be my thought. To write a hymn of praise and security. But what we see in Horatio is an anchored soul. A soul that had been anchored in Jesus long before he lost his daughters. Because if your soul is anchored, it is possible for your soul to be all right when everything in your world is all wrong. You see, it was his relationship with Jesus that would hold him secure when the most difficult thing in life that he could ever imagine happened to him. And so the question begs, as we finish today, your next fill-in, how do you anchor your soul? And the answer is putting Jesus first above all else. It's putting Jesus first. Not second, not third, not fourth place. That he's your first call instead of your last call. He's your first resort instead of your last resort. Because he's the one that will hold your life when life can't hold you. And this is what Jesus is inviting us into. He says, stop looking at the externals for security. Stop looking at the world for security. Look to me. To put him first every day. To spend time with him every day. To pray every day. To read his word every day. To feed your mind and your heart with worship and the Bible. Surround yourself with people who are pursuing Jesus. To show up every time you can when you get to church. I got to tell you, I was so impressed last week. It was like 27 below zero, and I just braced myself. I said, nobody's going to be here because people can watch online. We almost had record attendance last week. And what I'm sensing is that there's a hunger in people to say, God, I want to put you first. As I enter this new year, I don't want to do marriage the same, and I don't want to do relationships the same, and I don't want to do life the same. I don't want to do finance the same, and I don't want to do my work the same. Jesus, I want more of you in my life. And I'm going to put you in first place, and when you do that, your soul becomes anchored. And it's exactly the cry of David's heart in Psalm 63, 7 and 8, when he said, God, you have been my help. In other words, I found myself helpless, and God, you've been my help. In the shadow of your wings, I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. I just thought, what a powerful line. Can we say that of our soul, that we say, God, I want my soul to cling to you. I don't want you to just be an afterthought on a Sunday morning. God, I want my soul to cling to you, because then I don't have to be insecure about the future. I don't have to wonder where I stand with God. I won't be knocked down by life's challenges. I can live anchored. And it's exactly what he invites us into. So let's do that. What would it look like for you to cling to Jesus tomorrow morning when you got up? What would it look like to cling to Jesus on your way to work? What would it look like to cling to Jesus when you've got a couple hours in the evening and you normally fill it with TV or scrolling? I mean, what would it look like to cling to Jesus? To say, I know I'm busy, but I'm going to join a small group. I mean, I know we're busy, but we're going to stay connected. To cling to Jesus. He's our anchor. He's our hope. Maybe you're here today and you'd say, Ryan, I don't know where I stand with God. Because that is the beginning point of having an anchored soul. And if that's you today, I'd love to lead you in a prayer of forgiveness, a prayer of salvation. And if you want to be included in that, I would just invite you to quietly say this prayer after me. Just say, Dear Jesus, thank you for loving me and accepting me just as I am. Thank you for dying for me and rising again from the dead. I choose to put all my hope and trust in you. I ask you to forgive my sin and give me a brand new start. Today, I make you the leader of my life. I want to be anchored in you from this day forward. In Jesus' name. And Father, for all of us, we thank you for the invitation to be anchored in you, and ask for you to forgive us for all the distractions and everything else we've put our hope and our trust in. And I pray today would be a reawakening of our heart, a reawakening of our mind, a reawakening of our will that would recognize that you are the only firm foundation, that you're the only one that we could say, it is well with my soul when everything in our world is wrong. So tomorrow morning as we get up, would you remind us to cling to you? God, every day this week that we'd be intentional to cling to you. We put all of our hope and our trust in you, Jesus. And know in this process of clinging and following, you are doing something in us a fortifying of our soul that cannot be done any other way, and we welcome it, and we walk into it. In Jesus' name we pray.